What was it about Bohm's character, or maybe I have his political views in mind, that resulted in, or at least contributed to, his ideas not taking off? And I understand he had a very difficult academic career getting placement, and he moved around a lot, and that, I mean, sociology played a big role in the lack of adoption of the theory rather than maybe just its physical merit, since so many people really wanted a realist picture of quantum mechanics, a realist theory, a realist quantum theory.
Well, you know, it's a complicated story. Look, Bohmian mechanics is a simple theory, easy to understand. The history, however, and the problems about its acceptance, the whole history of quantum mechanics is not an easy story. It involves psychology, sociology, all kinds of peculiar twists and turns. Not at all easy to understand. But if you have gone through a physics education and have been told repeatedly that anything like what Bohm is proposing has been utterly refuted by analysis, by experiment, by the greatest minds of the century, and you're inclined to trust your teachers, you're not going to be open to this theory. You're going to think something must be wrong with it, which is exactly what I thought when I learned about the theory. At the end of the day, I realized there was nothing wrong with it, but that took me quite a while. I myself felt great hostility to the theory because it sort of undercut all the romantic ideas I had been hearing about concerning quantum mechanics. All these novel ideas about measurement creating reality, non-commuting observables, all this deep mystery in reality. It was intriguing. And of course I took it seriously because everybody told me that's the way it was. And so I didn't want to hear about these old-fashioned ideas of Bohm, a return to classical modes of thought, which have been utterly discredited by younger people more in tune with what physics demands. It's a natural thought. I'm sure that has a lot to do with the theory's non-acceptance.
I can see where that class with Kripke might have come in.
Absolutely. Right. Another class which had a big impact on me was at more or less the same time was given by Eugene Wigner on foundations of quantum mechanics.
Oh, wow.
And that was, though it wasn't as colorful as Kripke's lectures, Wigner's, but they were marvelous lectures nonetheless. Now, that was not a class in which Wigner advocated Bohmian mechanics, quite the contrary. But it was a class where it was made clear to me that most of what my physics teachers had told me was just plain wrong, because this great physicist, Wigner, was telling me about all the problems in quantum mechanics, which all my physics teacher had just swept under the rug. So I certainly learned from that to take what my teachers tell me with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. Two things in response. You mentioned being attracted by ideas like measurement, creating reality. It's just interesting to me because that sort of idea, I guess I'd refer to it as anti-realism, maybe quite broadly. It's never appealed to me.
So it did appeal to me for a time until I tried to, I was just a stupid student. What do you want from me? I mean, all my teachers were telling me these things. And as I said, I was very trusting of them. They must know what they were talking about. Those of them who did so, when they told me all this positivistic garbage, I accepted it because I assumed they must know what they're talking about. It was only later that I realized that I should not be accepting all this stuff I'm hearing from my teachers. So until I became skeptical of my teachers, I was excited about all these novel ideas. I didn't really understand them, but I thought they must be true because I was being assured that they were true by my teachers. It was only later that I realized it was complete garbage, and my teachers didn't know what they were talking about. They hadn't thought these things through at all. Mm-hmm. They were just repeating what they'd been told.
The other thing, though, that I had in mind, well, I actually didn't have this response in mind at all when I asked you that question, but what I thought you were going to talk about, which, and I might get the details wrong, I last read about these sociological quirks in Lee Smolin's book, Einstein's Unfinished Revolution, maybe a couple of months ago. But I think what I read was that Bohm had maybe communist sympathies, and his advisor was Oppenheimer, who's very, very much on people's minds right now because of the movie, and Oppenheimer didn't back him up, and there was all this back and forth here, and this is, I mean, part of what you have in mind, I imagine, when you say that the history of quantum mechanics and its theories and interpretations is quite convoluted. But my understanding was it was this communist sympathy that
was certainly played a big... Not just communist sympathies. He was kicked out of the country, basically. Princeton let go of him. He was kicked out of the country because he, I guess, was held in contempt of Congress for his refusing to name names at the McCarthy hearings, or at some hearings. I don't think it was McCarthy, but forget which hearings they were, but in the early 50s. So that was certainly a factor. But at that particular time, anybody who questioned orthodox quantum theory, Copenhagen, was likely to have his career ruined. So I can't say that was the sole contributing factor. It was certainly a factor. I mean, Murray Gell-Mann did suggest that Bohm's ideas he came up with these ideas because he was a communist. I somehow doubt that that's true. Oppenheimer, in reaction to somebody, I think Max Dresden once asked Oppenheimer in the early 50s, he came across Bohm's paper, couldn't find anything wrong with Bohm's 1951 or 2 paper, and he asked Oppenheimer about it. And Oppenheimer said, well, if we can't prove Bohm wrong, at least we can agree to ignore him. So there were basically no sympathetic listeners to him. Basically, people just wanted to dismiss Bohm. Not just because of his communist connections or lack thereof, but his refusal to name names. Not just because of that, but because, it was just considered poor physics to ask questions about the meaning of quantum mechanics. It was definitely considered as career-breaking to suggest that there's something hopelessly vague about Copenhagen quantum mechanics. That just was the situation at the time, and it remained that way for many years. And it's probably still somewhat that way. It's difficult to get jobs working at foundations of quantum mechanics and physics departments.